work. You know, we all want to get back to growth. My question is, why is Keir Starmer not taking us back into the single market and just allowing us to get back out, all the creative people to get back in Europe and make money for this country?
Well, we had Winston Marshall on the show last night from Mumford & Sons, and he said this is all exaggerated and a lot of the problems have been solved now for musicians.
If I remember rightly, what he's saying, I have to know, look, we need to get back out in Europe. Young bands need to get working. We need technicians, that's the PAs, the lighting. We need freedom of movement.
OK. Your line's a bit dodgy, Jeff, so I'm going to leave that there, but we got the gist of what you were asking about. So why not go back into the single market? It would certainly help the creative industries and maybe pursue freedom of movement too. Now, I think, Don, we could loosely say, well, not loosely, you are involved in the creative industries.
No, it's very loose. You were right. Thank you for that.
Do you have sympathy with Jeff on this?
No, I do very much so. Firstly, can I just say Winston Marshall, is it, from Mumford & Sons? He's not at Mumford & Sons anymore. He got thrown out, didn't he? Yeah, so he doesn't really... I know he doesn't do much music anymore, so I don't think he'll know what the situation is with touring bands in the EU. Unfortunately, my massive fan base does not extend massively into Europe, so I don't do any tours in Europe yet. But after this show, it'll all start. But I do know a lot of people that are in bands, and they have a massive problem with that. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into the Brexit debate again, but I certainly think there's got to be a way. There's certainly Keir Starmer needs to start moving. I mean, the Tories seem to be completely stuck. They can't do anything that brings us an inch closer to Europe. But to me, there must be a way that we can make simple things like that slightly more accessible.
Apparently, this is not at the EU level. No. They have to. It has to be negotiated with individual countries, and there are some countries that have sort of played ball, and others that haven't.
But, so, what's stopping us doing it?
I'm not sure that anything's stopping us doing it. But if a country doesn't want to make the rules easier, I suppose it's within their rights not to.
But I think there was definitely a shift between pre-Brexit and post-Brexit, so something changed.
Yeah. What about the position of the Labour Party here? Because Keir Starmer is walking a real tightrope, isn't he? Having been somebody who advocated remaining in the single market, wanted a second referendum, since he's been leader, he spent 3 years trying to not frighten the Brexit horses, particularly in the red wall seats, and yet now there's a lot of talk about him wanting to come to some new accommodation with the EU. That's quite politically risky for him, isn't it?
Well, just the whole thing of Brexit, I mean, obviously I was massively anti-Brexit. I'm a complete European. The whole thing depresses me greatly. But I do accept the referendum. I do accept that we're probably not going to be able to go back in. But the terror that anyone has of doing anything that looks even remotely pro-European or any sort of rapprochement, even using a word like that, look, it's French, let's run away. I don't know what he's doing. And I don't know why he's so terrified. Because I think 8 years later, it's time we moved on, and I think there must be so many people that want to do something.
Siobhain.
What he's trying to do is to move on. Now, he accepts that you can't go back to freedom of movement, you can't go back to the single market. You can, but that's over, that's done. But there is this trade and cooperation agreement that expires in 2025, and that relates to things like food standards and trade in food and animal welfare and the requirement for visas for travelling musicians. So this is a small bit of it, but a bit that we could get a bit of a better deal out of. And surely his job is to do the best he can within the acceptance.
But he does appear to be terrified of doing anything to bring us closer to Europe, and I think that's chicken.
I think that the last week has seen him look at the whole trade agreement. It's seen him raise the issue of coming to some sort of agreement with the EU on people coming over small boats. I think he's being quite...
But even on that, he's done a reverse ferret, hasn't he? Because first of all, he wanted to come to an agreement where it was written. I mean, sometimes people overinterpret things, but it was said that he was looking at us taking an allocation from the EU as part of a scheme, and in return they would take people back from us. And then he said, no, I'm not doing that at all. It's mixed messages at the very least.
I think it's... a smokescreen is provided by the Tories as soon as you talk about the EU. You can't have a proper conversation about it. The whole small boats thing, we're spending billions of pounds on hotels because we want to send people to Rwanda. We all know we're not capable of deporting anybody at the moment, or even deciding on somebody's asylum claim.
These lefty lawyers, Siobhain.
It's the fact that there's nobody in the Home Office processing the claims.
But again, the problem on that, and I'm getting slightly sidetracked from the question.
We need Liz Truss back, I think that's the answer.
Said no one ever.
We need John Reid back.
The problem is that Labour, quite rightly, as the opposition, criticises the government for the incompetence on this issue. And yet, if you look at their policy, there's very little difference.
Oh, there is a great deal of difference. We're not going to pursue the issue with Rwanda. We're going to get more. This is, boring stuff to the public, because what we're going to do is get caseworkers in who actually go through the case files.
The government already doing that.
But they're not.
We have.
But they're absolutely not. The numbers are going up.
Numbers like
they're
never
not
before in terms of
Home
Home Office.
The number of people in the Home Office employed to process claims has gone up quite a lot.
They've made redundant all the people who are experienced, and they bring people in without any experience and knowledge how to do it.
We are slightly going off Jeff's question, and that's completely my fault. Alicia?
I have to disagree with the point about we're too scared to go near Europe. We've just gone back into Horizon, which was the EU punishing us in the first place when we left. We never wanted to leave it. We're now back in, which is good. The Windsor Framework Agreement was an enormous achievement, which was praised roundabout. And look, I have conversations. I had the EU Foreign Affairs Committee in meeting with me today. I'm going to Brussels with my committee shortly. The reality is, when you speak to the EU ambassador, he says he's so pleased that the way he sees the relationship now is about how do we get onto a firmer footing in terms of sensible things. So, for example, a youth travel visa, Horizon. These were things 6 months ago I was telling Labour that we were working on with the EU, and they told me it was nonsense. And look, we've delivered on Horizon, it's a good thing. I don't think Labour have a policy to stand on when it comes to closer cooperation with the EU. And after this great jaunt to Europol, we've had European sources briefing that Keir Starmer's position is delusional. I mean, that's not the outcome they wanted from their visit. There's no answer on how many refugees they're going to take. There's no answer on where they're going to put them. And there's no sensible approach at all, any of this. And also the question of what they're going to give away. So if we're going to have this new agreement where we supposedly come back under the ECJ, for what benefit? What are you giving away at this? You can't just say, we're going to rejoin.
When David Blunkett did exactly the same deal, he got the camp at Songat closed. We took 1,500 people. The French took 3,500. So there's always a point of negotiation and discussion.
OK, let's go to Matthew.
Look, I think there's an interesting direction potentially Labour is going to go in there, and I think we got a bit of a hint there, which is this sense in which there might be some kind of arrangement where the UK basically agrees to follow more EU standards on things like food, and in exchange has slightly less friction in trade. But we have to be clear about
Would that be a good thing?
Well, no, I would kind of defeat the entire purpose of Brexit. I mean, what's the point of leaving the European Union only to adopt in perpetuity their standards and their regulations without having any say in their creation? This is, we're hearing today about this associate membership deal. Effectively, that's just single market membership, but single market membership without getting a vote in the regulations that come out of the single market. And it also potentially involves something like free movement. So with Brexit, I mean, there has been a failure here, and the failure is to take advantage of the opportunities Brexit provides when it comes to diverging from EU rules.
Singapore on Thames.
Well, that's not Singapore on Thames. It's
Argentina on the Channel.
It's little things. I've done quite a bit of work on the issue of cultivated meat. Now, this is meat grown in labs. Under the existing novel food regulations that the EU imposes, there's a UK company called Ivy Farms that wants to leave the UK and go to the US, where there's a clearer path to market. Now, the UK could reform the novel food regulations. We've left the EU. We could encourage the creation of that industry that's great for the environment, it's great for animal rights, but we have to take advantage of these very specific regulatory opportunities. Doesn't mean getting rid of all standards. It means ensuring our regulations are proportionate and necessary to fulfil their needs.
But surely tearing down trade barriers is what the IEA is all about. It's all about free markets, sort of free trade.
What is the IEA all about?
Yet you are arguing for the continuation of trade barriers.
Well, absolutely not. I think the UK should be as free trading with the EU and the rest of the world, and should cut down the barriers it has when it comes to tariffs for the rest of the world. I think the UK should make it much easier for people to import goods into the UK. I mean, obviously, we can't control what the EU does. If the EU wants to stab itself in the foot by making its consumers more difficult to access UK goods. That's something they're doing. But for example, I supported very much.
But we've done that by voting to leave the EU, haven't we? We've done exactly the same thing.
Well, it's not necessarily the case. Like, we can choose to leave the EU whilst continuing to allow EU goods to come freely into the UK. I mean, the UK has just recently announced that it's delaying additional checks on EU goods. I think we should delay those permanently. I don't think we need that additional red tape on EU goods. And these are decisions the UK can make now that's left the European Union.
So why hasn't it? See, this is, I think, the thing that a lot of Brexiteers think, well, OK, we voted to leave for perfectly good reasons, to do with sovereignty, to have control over our own laws, our own policies, our own trade policies. And yet what has actually changed? Why hasn't the British government done more to do the sort of things that you're suggesting?
That's an excellent question. I wish I could find an answer to it. I mean, it's really difficult. It's really difficult to do change. There's always a lot of barriers amongst civil servants. There's existing lobbyists.
It's the
lobby groups, it's the blobs, it's the workerati, it's the dinner parties.
Well, no.
Explain to me. I'm sorry. I'm really, as a comedian, I'm not a professional politician. I know nothing. What is the IEA? I don't get it. What do you do?
Well, don't even go there.
No, I'd love to.
We're a free market think tank.
And who pays you then? Who funds you?
We're paid funded by all sorts of individuals, foundations, corporates who believe in our mission. I mean, there's left-wing think tanks, there's right-wing think tanks, there's think tanks, all sorts of different perspectives. We have an educational mission and purpose that we.
Isn't what you're saying? It's the same thing as Liz Truss was saying yesterday. It's just she came back and just said, we had the right idea, but we just, it wasn't done right. All these great ideas don't seem to be done right. I don't get it. Has anyone ever done it right?
Has anyone ever done it right? Well, of course. I mean, time and time again, we've seen throughout history as taxes are reduced, as we allow free trade, as we cut regulations, that people are freer and more prosperous. I mean, the UK had an extreme period of success post the Thatcher reforms into the 90s and 2000s. We had a much more successful, open economy. I mean, you have to say that's surely a relative time of prosperity that came out of market-based reforms. I can give time and time again.
Why did Liz Truss fail then?
Well, Liz Truss failed for her own reasons. Liz Truss tried to spend a lot of money as well as cut taxes without doing anything on the spending side. It was irresponsible. She tried to do too much.
Weren't you guys right behind her, though?
I mean, Liz Truss is Liz Truss. I mean, there were certain things that I supported.
But wasn't she your
there were certain things like the energy price guarantee that my colleagues at the IEA
to be fair, the
criticised
IEA were
quite
fully
heavily.
behind Liz Truss.
You were fully behind her, so I just don't quite understand why.
Well, I don't think that's true. We were behind certain ideas that we agreed with from Liz Truss.
Didn't your former director, Mark Littlewood, go to work for her?
Yes.
No.
No, I don't think he did. I think he was given a peerage by Boris Johnson. But
it's difficult to keep.
I mean, look, the point
just
about
teasing,
think tanks is that think tanks are actually, whether they're on the left or the right, are a vital part of our political process.
100%. Get ideas going.
And exactly. And sometimes, there was a book on the history of think tanks called Thinking the Unthinkable. Mm-hmm. And some of their ideas are unthinkable.
But I think that's important to have unthinkable ideas.
Exactly.
To get it going. I totally get that. But I think you should know who funds them sometimes.
Apparently, Mark Littlewood has not been given a peerage, according to Corey. He's correct.
Maybe he's going to
slip in. But
there
are rumours he'll get one from Liz Truss.
There you go.
I thought he was around.
And we have to be clear, the implications of all this stuff about asking where the IA funding comes from is that I don't actually believe what I'm saying and that I'm just doing someone else's bidding. And I think that's actually quite offensive.
Exactly what I'm saying.
No, that is supremely offensive. I mean, you might disagree with what I say. You might have completely different views.
But then why would you not say who funds it?
The reason why we don't say it is because of basically, I'm going to be quite frank, people who disagree with us viciously on the internet, who will go and abuse and harass people who support us. If we publish a list of our supporters, they would go after and be attacked, including, I'm sorry, by people like yourself who disagree with us. That's why we respect the privacy of our donors. I mean,
right. Well, we've got that one out of the way, which is what we always do when someone from the IA comes. I mean,
can we talk about something important?
I tend to do that. Look, I have a policy on this because I don't see the point every time someone from a free market think tank comes onto the programme to spend 10 minutes of the programme talking about their funding, but I do it once a year. You've just had the allocation of this year. Thank you very much indeed, Dom. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Ask Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
19 minutes past 8. Alicia Kearns is with us. Dom Joly, Siobhain McDonagh and Matthew Lesh. Right, a text question now from Becca in Manchester. Is Liz Truss bleating on about how wrong she was anything other than a gift to Keir Starmer? Siobhain McDonagh. Open goal, kick the ball into the net.
I just think she's reminding us of how bad things got and how many people lost their mortgage offers, kind of that the pensions were moments away from collapsing. I mean, it's just an extraordinary febrile period. It's hard to believe it happened.
It's hard to believe it was only a year ago. It seems a lot more distant than that in some ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Matthew?
Is Liz Truss being particularly helpful? I mean, so the way I say this, Liz Truss is trying to make some specific points defending her legacy or their lack of legacy, and I think she's going to be around doing this for a very long time. Now there are some very real and genuine points that she raised about the UK's lacklustre economic growth, about the failure of our planning system to enable enough building and infrastructure, and all those kind of issues that are very serious and important. I do worry that there is some rewriting of history going on here, though. I mean, when she says that I was going to do all these spending cuts that were going to justify all the tax cuts and sort out the issue with the bonds and the debt. I mean, we didn't see that at the time. I mean, it was like a secret intent. If it was an intent at all, it seems a bit absurd to me.
Has she made your life more difficult? As a free market think tank, she's undermined the case for lower taxes. She's undermined the case for a smaller state, both of which, I mean, we can have debates about whether they're good things or bad things, but they're not intrinsically bad, and yet she's almost made them appear bad.
No, I think completely true sentiment there, and it is undeniably frustrating. Truss was Truss; she was her own thing. She frustrating. She chose to pursue a set of policies that in a particular context could have been perfectly reasonable and acceptable. She did it at a time when there was already huge uptick in the cost of government borrowing. There were already all these pressures going on with inflation, and then with this unknown factor of what was going on in the pension funds, which absolutely no one seemed to. Or let's just say almost nobody outside of the sector seemed to know was coming, as well as all this malarkey going on with opposition within her own party and whatever else.
But she did know she wasn't supposed to be doing it, because that's why they stopped the Office of Budgetary Responsibility from doing its report, and why they didn't call it a budget and they called it an economic event
secretary within
or whatever. So she knew that what she was doing was risky, and she knew that people were going to try and stop her, but she was doing it anyway. And it's really scary, I think, that the Conservative Party and the Conservative Party members were up for that.
Now, the honourable gentleman said from a sedentary position there that she fired her permanent secretary. Now, that's the one thing I would defend her on, because if you want to have a brand new economic policy and you've got essentially Gordon Brown's chief economic advisor as permanent secretary of the Treasury, you probably want to have a new person in there. So I'll give her a bit of a pass on that.
Can I have a little thought on her, because I watched her speech yesterday. I do find it quite extraordinary. Yes, I did. God. I'm a nerd. I really am in that way. I do find it quite extraordinary. So firstly, there's that idea that ex-prime ministers, even though she was so short you forget she was, don't kind of interfere in politics straight away. She hasn't hung around. It's only been a year. She came straight back in. But it was the lack of contrition. What's extraordinary to me about Liz Truss was fast-tracked by Cameron quite early on, supposedly because she was this incredible communicator. That's what I find astonishing. She's the least exciting vote-winning communicator I've ever seen. And she came back yesterday, and I think in a way you can link it in a little way to the Russell Brand episode, the Trump thing, everything, in that it's a kind of post-truth. You just come back, you don't apologise, you just say, I was right, everyone else, it was the fault of everyone else, and I'm just going to plough on because it was just done wrong by everyone else. Brexit had the same thing, Trump does it, Brand has his supporters on YouTube who also think he's some sort of weird intellectual Jesus. We're living in a very strange world right now.
And by getting rid of Tom Scholar as the head of the Treasury and not having the Office of Budget Responsibility report, she was taking the brakes off her behaviour, and she knew that's why she was doing it. She must, on some level, have had some, Kwasi Kwarteng, her Chancellor, must have had some understanding of what this was going to do.
Well, they didn't learn from Margaret Thatcher, because Margaret Thatcher was always seen as a bit of a revolutionary, but if you look at what she actually did, it was slowly catching.
It was cleverly, yeah.
And she did it. I mean, trade union reform is a very good example of that. If Liz Truss in 1979 had gone in all guns blazing on trade union reform, I doubt whether it would have been very successful. Alicia, when you see Liz Truss in the voting lobby, are you not tempted to go up to her and say, why don't you just shut the up?
I don't see her in the voting lobby very often, if I'm honest.
But if you did?
I think we all know that I did not back Liz Truss at any point in time, whether it was as Foreign Secretary or Prime Minister. But I think the point I always point to is, look, Theresa May, she stopped being Prime Minister. She didn't do a single media interview for, 4 years, 5 years? She respectfully worked from the backbenches, recognising that when she used her voice as former Prime Minister of this country, it was to make an important point that would potentially change the tenor of the debate or the focus of the chamber. That is what former Prime Ministers should be doing, not book deals, not running around giving big speeches, trying to rewrite history. They should be focused on either playing their role as parliamentarians responsibly and using that voice and the role that they had respectfully, or frankly, they should resign as MPs and disappear.
Well, strangely, I'm going to see Theresa May at the Cheltenham Literature Festival, so book deals are still part of the deal, I think.
Yes, but there's a slight difference, I think, between Liz Truss, who says she's writing a book on what she knows,
lessons,
and Theresa May, who's done 4 or 5 years and who has worked incredibly hard and has been a respectful and dutiful woman who has worked incredibly hard and commands the respect of the House.
I think that's fair.
Right, let's go to Hassan in Cambridge. Hassan, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, hello. Is Diane Abbott right to say that she expects no justice from Keir Starmer's Labour? And should she run as an independent or form a new UKIP for the left with Jeremy Corbyn for the next election?
Well, there's a thought. I'm going to come to you again first of all. No justice from Keir Starmer. She's written quite an incendiary letter today. Have you read it?
No, I haven't. I can imagine what it says. I mean...
Well, let me just tell you what it says. She's posted it on social media this evening, describing her party's disciplinary action against her as fraudulent and procedurally improper. The investigation follows her having the Labour whip suspended for writing a letter to The Observer in which she suggested white minority groups, including Jewish people, do not suffer from the same kinds of racism as black people do. I think gingers came into it somewhere, but I can't quite remember the context.
I mean, here we are again, aren't we? Look, Diane, first black woman to be elected. She's got a great legacy, but I feel really sad at the moment. I think she's just burning her past and her record, and it's really sad to see.
Doesn't she, I mean, as the first black woman to be elected to the House of Commons in 1987, doesn't she deserve a little bit of leeway?
I think she's got so much leeway. That's why I think she's still in the Labour Party. I think she's testing it, but ultimately you have to make a judgment about what people say about very, very serious issues.
But the left are being purged, aren't they, by Keir Starmer?
I don't see John McDonald being purged. I don't see
Jamie Driscoll, a perfectly reasonable, successful mayor of a northern authority, being purged. Well, he's not being allowed to stand.
I think that we would differ on Jamie Driscoll's competence and ability. So, no, I don't see that at all. I mean, the Socialist campaign group within the Parliamentary Labour Party is quite a big group, and they're there and nobody's going after them. But what do you do? And it is really difficult. What do you do about Diane Abbott when she writes letters?
That's a musical, I think.
Yeah. I was going to give the phone number out then so people can make their own suggestions, but I suspect way lies madness. Alicia?
I think, quite frankly, if it was in reverse, if someone had said this, if a white person had said something similar to this, they'd have been cut immediately. They'd have had whip suspended. If I'm honest, I think we have to have a zero tolerance policy on racism. I think you can't just say, well, in the past I've done this and I've done that. Her comments back in April, and I was just trying to Google to find the letter that she wrote at the time, were outrageous. And she has never apologised for them. She said it was a first draft that was by mistake sent across to The Observer.
Twice.
Yes. Her comments were outrageous. And actually, I think it's important that the Labour Party sends a message that they will not allow messages like this, particularly when 100%. It was anti-Semitic, what she said. 100%. And the reality is the Labour Party has a choice between backing an MP who, quite frankly, is very rarely in Parliament and I don't believe as effective as she used to be, or making a point they will fight anti-Semitism and dealing with her.
Matthew?
It seems like a weird strategy to play for the kind of socialist left of the Labour Party. I mean, they've clearly been so delegitimised by the Corbyn project, so they're delegitimised by these accusations, very true accusations indeed, around anti-Semitism, and that letter does not add to that narrative at all. You would think this would be their moment to be quiet and let Keir Starmer take Labour into government, and then maybe they can try to push policy in the direction that they want. Playing this game that, we're all being purged and being poorly treated.
I don't think that is what happened. I think they are being very, very, very quiet because the whole anti-Semitism thing undermined them and their legitimacy. And Keir Starmer, however you feel about him, has really dealt with that, made that as a priority, and has really dealt with it. I think Diane, for many reasons, is a bit of an outrider there. You don't see any of those people coming to support her at this stage, do you? That she's out there and she's doing this stuff on her own.
Tom?
I mean, I've got a lot of respect for Diane Abbott's position as what she did in the past as a sort of groundbreaking MP, but I'm afraid there is a massive blind spot in the Labour Party, or certainly that section of the Labour Party, to do with Jewish people. And I mean, I read the David Baddiel's book, Jews Don't Count, and I think it's fascinating in that. It's very odd how people don't associate racism. It is a weird blind spot. Also, I have a ginger daughter, so this is an area very close to me, and they definitely do get bullied occasionally. So, I mean...
I remember I did a whole hour on gingerism once. It got huge numbers of calls.
It's a tricky...
Maybe I should repeat it soon. It was a long time ago. We had Patsy Palmer from EastEnders ringing in.
Did you really?
We did.
Well,
yes.
There you go.
I know. It's worth doing it again just for that. Ricky? Right, we will take more of your questions in just a moment. It's 8:30 on LBC. Charlotte Morgan has the news headlines.
Ukraine's president says Russia is weaponizing food, energy and children in its war against his country. Volodymyr Zelensky has been speaking at the UN General Assembly in New York, where Joe Biden's urged leaders to stand up to Moscow's aggression. An immigration centre in West Sussex has been told it should only hold people for 28 days after a report found they were mistreated. It claims they were held in prison-like conditions in 2017. The Home Office says it's considering the recommendation. And doctors say plans to introduce minimum service levels on strike days will not stop them taking industrial action. Consultants started a 48-hour walkout in England today, with junior doctors joining them tomorrow. LBC weather: heavy rain moving into the southeast overnight with a low of 6.
You may not know the name, but you will know the music. When you need a change of pace, try LBC's sister station, Classic FM, and enjoy the world's greatest music. Listen on your radio, on Global Player, or ask your smart speaker to play Classic FM.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
With us on the panel, Dom Joly, Siobhain, McDonagh, Matthew Lesh and Alicia Kearns. Now, I have to ask you this question. I think you'll understand that. The Sunday Times story, was it Sunday Times? It was, wasn't it? Last weekend about this spy who had been coordinating an all-party group in Parliament on China and has been arrested. He denies any wrongdoing at all. Now, what can you tell us about this, given that I think he did work for you?
So I think you understand, as it's a live investigation. I'm not, because it is a matter of national security, but also, as with any live investigation, none of us would ever do anything to in any way undermine it. But look, I think this goes to the heart of a very serious issue. Look, there are a number of us who are sanctioned. I chair a sanctioned organisation. The reality is we know the Chinese government are trying to shut down anyone who silences them. They have come for me before, they will come for me again. But the reality is that this is what they try to do. They try and target those who are effective and take a stand against them. But I can be very clear, I won't be silenced.
And you just come back from Vietnam. You must be nervous.
I have just come back from
nervous
Vietnam.
There, quite near the border.
Originally, they put me a flight going via China. My team kept saying, she can't fly via China. And Parliament kept saying, but it's £100 cheaper. And they kept saying, she can't fly via China.
The IA would approve of that, wouldn't it? Saving money. I mean, presumably, when an MP recruits staff, I mean, Siobhain, maybe you've got a view on this. You try and do your best in due diligence. Presumably you had no clue during your working relationship with him that he had any views that might be counter to the work that he was doing.
Look, I can't comment on any of that, and that will become very clear at a later point when I hope we see the next stage from the police and the next information. But what I would say is that every person who has a parliamentary pass goes through security clearance, which is done by Parliament and by the security services supporting them. There is a reason why you may wish to choose to have your staff security cleared and to have them have a parliamentary pass, and that is explicitly to give you that support and reassurance. And in the past, the security services have denied clearance to certain people. So that is not a comment on this specific case, but that is a comment on security in general.
This isn't relevant, but one of my first jobs was in Parliament, and I was allowed a security pass in Parliament for 2 years. So
reform the system.
I have to say, there's definitely security issues.
I took 3 weeks, which I was a bit worried about.
Well, I was born in Beirut. That was really
3 weeks is amazing. Yeah, that's quicker than anyone else's.
Right, let's move on to a caller. Anthony's in Blackpool. Hello, Anthony.
Evening, yes. I'm drawn to thinking of the little Dutch boy who stuck his fingers in the dike. My question is, why are striking doctors being scapegoated when waiting lists have been rising year on year since 2011?
Are you suggesting that these strikes are having no impact on waiting lists?
Clearly, they're having they're being slightly deleterious. But no, my point, as you know, Iain, I think you're being rather cynical there, aren't you?
I'm pointing out, I would have thought, what was an obvious fact to anybody, whatever side they're on this dispute, that if you have strikes by junior doctors and surgeons, inevitably that means the waiting lists go up. I'm not suggesting that's the main reason that we have 7.6 million people on a waiting list at the moment, but it's not going to make it any better, is it?
Are you being an apologist for the fact that these waiting lists have been rising?
No, I'm not being an apologist at all. I just said that it certainly doesn't have the impact of the majority of the waiting list, but it certainly won't reduce them. Let's go to our panel. Matthew Lesh.
Yeah, look, I'd be quite interested if doctors could go on strike and the waiting list didn't get any longer. Then I'd have some questions about whether doctors are actually doing anything in the first place. It seems quite ridiculous. I mean, I think there's been some estimates around that something like 650,000 appointments have been delayed or cancelled because of the strikes, that they're intrinsically going to have an impact on the health system. Obviously, legally speaking, doctors are most welcome to strike and they're most welcome to make claims for whatever pay rises they like. Whether or not that's reasonable and affordable and costless is a good question. It's worth noting I kind of have slightly less sympathy for doctors than a lot of other professions that are striking. I mean, just earlier this year, the government announced that they were getting rid of the cap on pensions because across their lifetime, doctors were able to save so much money that they were coming into that cap of something over £1 million. They're some of the best paid public sector workers as they move on through their careers. And asking for something like 35% pay rises doesn't seem like something that's particularly reasonable and affordable at this point.
Tom Joly.
I don't want to get into this, it's too distressing really, but I think what really upset me today was the Health Secretary's hint that doctors might be, or consultants might be forced to, if all of them went on a strike, that somehow they'd be forced to turn up at hospitals. I mean, how does that play out?
They want to impose minimum service levels, which
yes, but what if a doctor refuses? What's going to happen?
Well, then there would be another one approach
in place. It's another smokescreen, isn't it? Let's talk about minimum standards as if they're not happening, and they are happening. My sister died 3 months ago, and we were lucky that we only had to take her into A&E a few times. But I have to say, it was just an extraordinary process when you saw the queues and the people in distress and the length of time they were waiting. Just to get near the toilet, you'd have to move people in their wheelchairs out of the way. You'd have a test and then you'd be sent back outside. Our NHS is in a terrible state. People are leaving. We can't recruit. Young doctors are going to Australia. People are taking ever more time off sick due to stress. We just can't carry on blaming somebody else. Somebody's got to get involved and do something and improve it.
But what are you going to do? I have to say, I'm totally with you on that, but I don't know what Labour's proposing that's going to make it better. I hope you have got something, but what is it?
Well, hopefully we've got a bit more goodwill and we're willing to sit down and talk to the doctors about what it is they would like to see happen. I don't believe that this is just about pay. I believe it's the fact that they feel undervalued. I believe it's the fact that the NHS is in a mess and that things need to be improved.
But that's motherhood and apple pie. Everyone can agree with that. But the only extra spending commitment that Labour have entered into on the NHS is to spend the money that they rise through abolishing non-dom status. Now, they say that'll pay for the recruitment of more doctors and nurses. Well, fine. But if that's the limit of Labour's ambition, that's not going to attract many votes, is it?
Well, I can only take you, Ian, to what happened in 1997 when we made a commitment not to stand by the Conservative government's spending plans for 2 years. But in that time, we were able to get our plans together about having treatment and diagnostic centres, about plans to actually bring in reform to actually reduce waiting lists. So, yes,
which,
it is about...
did happen.
Yeah. It is about spending money, but it's also about having the right plan in place and having the goodwill for people to being prepared to listen to you.
Alicia Kearns, obviously it's an embarrassment for any government for waiting lists to be this high. They keep going up. Doesn't seem to be any sign that they're going to come down anytime soon, and yet that's one of the Prime Minister's 5 pledges, which he's not doing it very well on hardly any of them. What can you say to Anthony in Blackpool?
So look, I think in January, waiting lists were falling. We went into the first quarter of this year really pleased that we were making progress on waiting lists. The statistic now is actually that 900,000 appointments or procedures were cancelled because of the strikes. The people currently striking are earning £120,000 a year, and they are saying they want more money when exactly the point about us having to lift the cap on their pensions. Minimum service levels are about saying that for things like dialysis, things like chemo, there should be minimum service levels, and they possibly need to be higher than what is currently being agreed. I don't think that is an unfair expectation to make and to ask when we have trained people, we have supported them, they've been able to have this career in the services. We are very grateful for doctors for all that they do, but there is also a reality check. And until these strikes were happening, actually what you saw is month after month since January, the Conservatives are putting out statistics that showed that waiting lists were falling.
Well, welcome to any A&E in London, Alicia, and you will just see a wasteland.
Please don't use your personal experience against us. My mother was in A&E every month for the last 18 months of her life. We never had those waitings. I've never had to push people outside doors. I'm not going to use my personal experiences within this story.
I have to say, and okay, we can only go on our own experiences, but when I broke my hip back in May, I was taken to St Thomas's Hospital, the one opposite Parliament, the other side of the Thames, and I was the only person in A&E, which admittedly they did say that was very unusual. I did
because you were coming.
Well, I don't know, but I mean, look, your experience will have been repeated by many people all over the country listening to this programme now, so I'm not diminishing it at all. I know what you went through at that time, and it must have been horrendous. But I think sometimes we do have a habit of talking up sort of a crisis when in some A&Es there are crises, but in other A&Es there aren't.
Well, I've been in St Thomas's as well, and I have to say there were plenty of people there when I was there, and there were very big queues. And anybody who tries to get a GP appointment, tries to get much out of their GP surgery, will know just what a crisis there is.
I think we have to be clear, this is a long-running NHS crisis. The NHS is always in crisis, and unfortunately for many years it is underperformed compared to other systems in Europe. It's interesting you mentioned Australia as a place where UK doctors are going to. I mean, these places have different structures of their healthcare systems. I'd be interested to see, and I'm interested to learn about Labour's reform plans and whether you're willing to look at some of those social insurance systems they have very successfully in Denmark or in Germany. Look at the Australian system where there's a very big mix between private and public provision for healthcare. Is the mind of reform as open to that as
no, because whenever you talk about reform in this country, people automatically assume it means privatisation, and obviously that's not very popular. Right, let's move on to another question in just a couple of minutes' time. It's 8:45.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Alicia, Kearns, Dom, Joly, Siobhain, McDonagh and Matthew Lesh here answering your questions. Right, here's a text question from Michael in Fulham. It must be the shortest one we've ever had. Is there any point to HS2 anymore? Now, this is on the back of Labour declining to promise it would go ahead with building the HS2 link between Birmingham and Manchester if the government abandons that part of the project first. The planned link between Birmingham and Leeds has already been scrapped. Are you with me at the back? And the planned section between West and Central London has also been delayed, possibly for as long as 20 years. Now, in 2010, the total budget for HS2 was set at £33 billion. A year ago, it had climbed to £106 billion. So the question is there any point to HS2 anymore? Dom?
Okay, I'm really pleased this is being asked because I've been on Question Time twice, and the first time this came up, and I had no opinion on it whatsoever, and I was incredibly ignorant.
It's horrible when that happens.
But I now,
thank goodness you have now.
I've got a little bit more thought on it now. I think, firstly, like everyone else, I think the original idea for it was brilliant. You know, it's like levelling up. It's let's open up the north. Let's get much more infrastructure between cities in the north. Let's make it quicker to go from London to wherever. Since then, I know that the budget has gone up just insanely. I have no idea where that thing is supposed to go now. I know it's stopping 10 minutes short of London. It might get to Birmingham. I don't know what's happening with it. I don't know whether it's ever going to finish. I don't know how long it's going to be. And it's insane. When you look at other places, I went to for Save the Children. I went to Ukraine recently, and I went down I went through from the Polish border, went down to Odessa, then across to Mykolaiv. We're in the middle of a war. And it took me 13 hours to take a train down from the Polish border to Odessa. They apologised. It was 2 minutes late. And it cost me, I think, £22. Now, obviously, it's not a fair comparison, but the cost of transport in this country is so insane. I personally would like to, get rid of all the beaching reforms. Let's use those local... I know that's completely unrealistic, but these kind of mega infrastructure things, either do them properly and quickly... or don't do them at all. But this kind of drip thing is insane.
Alicia?
So look, I mean, HS2 doesn't affect my constituency, so I'm not going to lie, this isn't something I spend a lot of my time looking at, and I feel like Dom maybe on Question Time a while ago, but spades are in the ground. I mean, I do have 100 jobs in my constituency building a lot of the bridges, the clever complex bits of metal and concrete that go around.
You're such an expert.
I know, honestly.
I
learned about jobs, these big things. It was, the size of, I've never seen lorries the size of the things they're shipping around. Anyway, it's great for Melton Mowbray. But, look, I do struggle with this project. Costs are going up like everything is going up. But I am pleased more in the investments we're making in roads, the journeys we're making to allow people to go from east to west and west to east, I actually think are more important personally.
I agree.
Than necessarily going from north to south. But that's because we have some amazing train routes already. I mean, the Manchester bit isn't confirmed as yet, but this just isn't something that I spend a lot of my time on, I'm afraid.
Even though it's costing £106 billion a year. Not a year, in total.
It is, yeah.
OK, Matthew.
Look, it's obviously an outrageously expensive white elephant. A lot of the underlying cost-benefit analysis depended on this idea of basically business people getting from London to Manchester slightly faster with less commuting for that purpose because of digital meetings. It's not clear to me that the cost of $106 billion justifies...
This is like 8 minutes faster or something. It's not going to change.
The advocates will say it's about capacity on the system. I think there are probably some other ways to build capacity, and a lot of that money could be spent better on local projects.
But the fact is, it as Alicia said, it's being built at the moment. It's too late to stop it.
Well, you could stop parts of it, although then it becomes even more useless. What I think, though, is that there's...
We could have a coach service between the bits.
There's a broader conversation I think we need to have, which is just how much it costs to build infrastructure in the UK. That's what this is really about. Yeah. I mean, HS2 would be a great project if it costs 30 or 40 billion. Why does it cost 100 billion? Yeah. And there's something to do with every single road project we build, every single tram, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Again and again, the UK has made it so hard to plan.
But it's short-termism. It's one of the real problems, I think, with politics is that you either do it on a grand scale and get it done, but, for any government, I can understand why it's not attractive.
With the planning system, it's about the way in which...
But there was a cross-party agreement on this. This started when Andrew Adonis was Transport Secretary. What was it, 2008, 2009? And the Conservatives then embraced it. So you would have thought, given that there was cross-party support, not every MP supported it, but the two main parties did, and I think the Lib Dems eventually did, I'm not sure they do now. And you think, well, given that, it ought to have been something that was relatively smooth, Siobhain?
Well, again, I think there's a fair point about our planning system. People don't have any reason to support developments because they get nothing automatically out of it. You know, if you were able to say to people, agree to this and your council tax will be paid for the next 5 years, or you'll get something you really want out of it, I think we'd make it much quicker. My personal view is we're so far into it, we should actually finish it, because I think infrastructure projects, getting faster to places, having better connectivity, it's the only way things are going to get better in the north, and it's only a way that we're going to get better as a country as well.
Why aren't Labour able to have an official policy on it, though, given that it was a Labour idea in the first place?
Because they don't know, we don't know how much it's going to cost. And, you know, just like the conversations we've had earlier on about the EU and whether Keir Starmer should be straightforward about trying to propose changes, it's very hard when you don't know what the financial situation you're going to inherit is.
I think voters deserve to know before the next election what Labour's view on this is. They can't just say, oh, we'll tell you after the election when we've seen the books.
Well, that strikes me as a very reasonable and fair position. All I can say to you, Iain, is for my part, I think we should get on with it and finish it.
Although I will just quickly add, all those trains you took across Ukraine, the bridges for the trains were rebuilt by British government. We funded most of the bridges recovery in Ukraine, which is something I'm really proud of.
What, you mean after they've been blown up?
After they've been blown up by Russians, we've gone back in and rebuilt most of
Ukraine's...
Ukraine's...
Well, thank you for that, because otherwise it would have been a very difficult trip.
No.
Right, thank you for that, Michael. Let's go to John in Northolt, who says, Zelensky at the UN today demanded a complete Russian withdrawal from Ukraine. Is that remotely possible? Alicia?
Well, Russia are never going to withdraw from Ukraine. They're going to have to be pushed out or fought out every single metre and mile until they realise that you cannot achieve sovereignty through violence. Look, we don't have a choice here. All these people going around suggesting that there could be a peace plan tomorrow, we could agree a withdrawal agreement. At this point, Putin is not willing to end the war, and the Ukrainians can now see the Sea of Azov in their sights. They've actually had an enormous strategic success over the last 3 or 4 weeks, and they can really see where it's going to go, but it's still going to last another 1 to 3 years. But the reality is the Ukrainians, after all they have been through, children in concentration camps in Crimea, rape, torture, castration, you name it, these are people who are saying we will fight for our freedoms, and quite frankly, we need to support them as long as they want to do so, because Putin needs to learn that this is not something he can continue to do, whether it's Georgia, whether it's Ukraine, or whether it's elsewhere.
Tom, you've said you've just been there.
Yeah, I mean, I've been there twice. I went in 2016.
How has your view of this war been affected by actually being there?
On a human nature, what's extraordinary is going to places like Mykolaiv and Odessa, where one moment you could be in, anywhere in Western Europe, beautiful cities, life goes on as normal. I mean, having grown up in Beirut, I'm sort of slightly used to that bipolar nature of living in a war, and then suddenly air raids go and you're in the bunker, and it's the long-term stress on the people and on kids especially. I was there for Save the Children, that is just debilitating. But I have to say, with the war itself, obviously I think it was a completely illegal invasion, and I think the Ukrainians totally have every right to try and kick the Russians out, and so they should. But both times I've been there, it felt like visiting often what the First World War must have looked like. It's trench warfare, and it's people fighting for a long time to gain half a mile, and then that half a mile gets taken back. And I can't see, I mean, it'll go on forever. And so there will be some compromise. I mean, it's not something I want, but I just can't see how it's going to end. I don't think a military victory for either side is particularly likely.
Matthew?
I mean, I would absolutely and entirely love to see total victory for the Ukrainian people. I think there's no more admirable story in modern times than the fact that with such low expectations set by the world, Zelensky stayed and the Ukrainian people fought, and we've come together and united across the West for the most part, and been able to give them the resources to do so. And we should consider the fact that it's the Ukrainian people who want to keep fighting and very sadly keep dying for the cause of their sovereignty and the cause of liberal democratic values. We should do everything we can to maintain that for as long as possible. I mean, I completely respect the idea of saying we should kick out the Russians. I think if it does end in some kind of negotiation, it needs to be some kind of negotiation that the Ukrainian people are willing to support. I mean, there's a bit of a real
That's the key.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
I just think an army that believes in its cause can always be an army that is recruited and forced to fight, and that the Ukrainians have shown such resolve and have made the West look at itself over the last few years that I.
Okay. That's very true. The big difference is that, yeah.
Right, let's move on to our fun question from Sam in Warwick. A Danish artist has been forced to pay back nearly £60,000 to a museum after submitting 2 blank canvases for an exhibition. Panel, fess up. When could you frankly not be bothered and had to pass off your laziness as proper work? I don't know which of you to come to first on this. Siobhain.
I can only think when I've been not prepared to make a dinner for friends coming round and just got a takeaway.
And did they notice the difference?
They enjoyed it more.
Well, I'll remember that the next time an invitation comes to dinner. Matthew?
Yeah, when have I been too lazy to do the work? I mean, there is a bit of a...
The Liz Truss Leadership Manifesto?
Very funny.
The Liz Truss Premiership.
I mean, realistically, when you're writing a lot of stuff, as I'm sure you have as well, and sometimes you think, geez, that was great. Sometimes you think, that was lazy. That wasn't that interesting. I've just kind of thrown out the most generic of thoughts onto the page there and published it, but they shouldn't have, and I don't know what they've just done there. So I guess those are the times when you feel a little bit guilty about what you've done.
I shall remember that next time I read a column of yours. Alicia?
I mean, I've definitely pulled the Siobhain McDonagh one quite a few times, although it tends to be when you go out and buy all those little snackables and you make it look like you set up some great feast. But I think I was saying to you guys during the break, my son was on like his 9th bedtime story a few weeks ago. So I went on ChatGPT and said to it, I need a 4-minute bedtime story, 4 or 5-year-olds. It needed to cover these 11 incredibly precise, specific things that he had to have in his bedtime story. And it came up with an amazing story. I read it to him from start to finish and he was passed out by the end of it. So maybe ChatGPT for all those desperate parents listening whose kids are still awake like mine definitely are. Crack on.
Dom?
Well, I mean, that's genius. I also cheated with ChatGPT. I did a column the other day and I just thought, I wonder if it'll be any worse or any better. And, there wasn't much difference. It was fine. So I did put it in, but I actually said that this whole thing had been written by it and no one complained, no one cared.
Whoever's paying him for the columns, I'm here. Yeah. My ChatGPT.
Constant life is not.
Listen, thank you very much indeed to Alicia Kearns, to Dom Joly, Siobhain McDonagh and Matthew Lesh. Tomorrow on Cross Question, we have Labour MP and former Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell, Telegraph columnist and former editor of the paper, Lord Charles Moore, and charity founder, the Reverend Stephen Chalk, plus a third unidentified panellist so far. But we will have a fourth one, I'm sure. Now, coming up in the next hour, a properly funded social care system would power growth, unlock jobs, boost business and save the NHS money. That's according to a Future Social Care Coalition report issued this week. Well, that all sounds rather good. So why haven't we got one? And what can we do to make social care a more attractive sector for people to go and work in? It's tempting to say, well, it's all about money. And I think to a large extent it is. So if you work in social care, what would you do to reform the system to make it more attractive for others to join? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call here on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. The Home Office says it's carefully considering a report's suggestions after it found people at an immigration centre near Gatwick Airport were mistreated in prison-like conditions. The review into the Brook House in West Sussex has made 33 recommendations.